Most people think a stroke happens suddenly, without warning, out of nowhere. But in many cases, this is not true. The body often gives signals, hours before, sometimes even earlier. But the problem is not that the signals are weak. The problem is that people do not recognize them or they ignore them because they don't look serious, because they pass quickly, because they don't cause pain. And that is exactly why they are dangerous. One of the most important early signs is sudden weakness, not general tiredness, not fatigue after work, but a sudden change. A strange feeling that one side of the body is not as strong as usual, a hand feels different, a leg feels heavier, movement becomes less controlled. Another key sign is facial asymmetry. The face may look slightly different. One side may not move normally. A smile may appear uneven. Speech may feel slightly off. Words may not come out as clearly. These changes can be subtle. They may last a few minutes, then disappear. And this is where the mistake happens. People relax. They think everything is fine. But this temporary episode may be a warning, a signal that blood flow to the brain was briefly disrupted. And if nothing changes, the next episode may not pass. To understand these warning signs, you need to understand what a stroke is. A stroke happens when blood flow to a part of the brain is reduced or blocked. The brain depends on a constant supply of oxygen. Even a short interruption can affect function. But before a full stroke occurs, the body may experience a temporary disruption. This is often called a transient episode. Blood flow is reduced. The brain reacts. Symptoms appear. Then blood flow returns, and symptoms disappear. Because everything returns to normal, people ignore it. But this is one of the most critical moments, because it shows that something is already unstable. Blood vessels may be narrowed. Blood flow may be inconsistent. The system is no longer reliable, and the brain is extremely sensitive. Even small changes in circulation can affect movement, speech, and coordination. This is why symptoms appear suddenly and disappear just as quickly. Another important detail is location. Different parts of the brain control different functions. If the affected area controls movement, weakness appears. If it controls speech, speech changes. If it controls facial muscles, the face changes. These are not random symptoms. They reflect exactly where the blood flow is disrupted. Understanding this helps recognize patterns, because the body is not failing randomly. It is showing exactly what is under stress. The most dangerous symptoms are not always the strongest ones. They are the ones that feel minor, because minor symptoms are easy to dismiss. One of the most ignored signs is brief weakness. A person may suddenly feel that their arm is weaker. They may drop something. They may feel less control. But after a few minutes, everything returns to normal, so they forget it. Another common sign is facial asymmetry. A person may notice that their face feels strange, but when they look in the mirror, the change is small, not dramatic, so they ignore it. Speech changes are also often missed. Words may come out slightly slower or less clear, but because the person can still speak, they assume everything is fine. Another important sign is sudden dizziness, not light dizziness, but a sudden loss of balance, a feeling that the body is not stable. Some people experience blurred vision or temporary loss of vision in one eye. These symptoms may last minutes, then disappear, and this creates a false sense of safety. But the disappearance of symptoms does not mean the problem is gone. It means the body temporarily compensated, and compensation does not last forever. The most dangerous mistake people make is waiting. Waiting to see if the symptom will return. Waiting to see if it gets worse. Waiting to feel something more serious. But time is the most critical factor when it comes to the brain. When blood flow is disrupted, brain cells begin to suffer, and they do not recover easily. Even a short delay can change the outcome. Many people ignore early signs because they disappear. They think, if it passed, it wasn't serious. But this is exactly the opposite. If a symptom appears suddenly and disappears, it may be a warning. a temporary interruption, a signal that something is unstable. Another common mistake is self-explanation. People try to find simple reasons. Maybe I was tired, or maybe I stood up too quickly. Maybe it's stress. These explanations feel logical. They reduce fear, but they also delay action, and delay is the biggest risk. Another issue is that symptoms are often painless. There is no sharp pain, no dramatic sensation, just a change. And because there is no pain, people do not react. But the brain does not always produce pain signals. It produces functional changes, movement, speech, balance. These are the real indicators. And ignoring them means ignoring the most important signals. The body rarely gives just one warning. In many cases, symptoms repeat, but in slightly different ways. A person may first experience weakness, then days later, dizziness, then maybe speech difficulty. Each episode may be brief, each may disappear, and because they are not identical, they are not connected, but they are connected. They are part of the same process. The system is unstable. Blood flow is inconsistent. The brain is reacting. Another important point is timing. These warnings may happen hours apart or days apart. There is no fixed pattern. This makes it harder to recognize. People think each event is separate, but the body is showing a pattern. Another detail is intensity. The first symptoms may be very mild, barely noticeable. Then they become stronger, then more frequent. This progression is critical because it shows that the situation is developing, not staying the same. And this is where awareness matters, because recognizing the pattern early can change everything. Ignoring it allows the process to continue. There is a moment when warning signs stop being temporary and become permanent. This is when a stroke occurs. The symptoms do not disappear. Weakness remains. Speech does not return to normal. Balance is lost. At this point, the brain is no longer compensating. Blood flow is blocked or severely reduced, and time becomes critical. The faster action is taken, the better the outcome. But the key point is this. This moment does not come out of nowhere. It is usually preceded by signals. Signals that were ignored. Signals that were misunderstood. Signals that did not seem serious enough. The transition from warning to event is often silent. There is no clear line, only a gradual loss of stability, and then a sudden change. The most important thing to understand is that the body tries to protect you. It shows you what is happening, but it does not force you to act. That decision is yours. And the earlier you recognize the pattern, the more control you have over the outcome. Many people believe that stroke only happens to the elderly or to people with serious illness, but this is not always true. Risk can develop quietly, and often much earlier than expected. One of the main risk factors is high blood pressure, but the problem is that it may not cause symptoms. A person may feel completely normal, but inside, blood vessels are under constant stress. Over time, this weakens them. Another important factor is stress, not occasional stress, but constant background tension, the kind that never fully goes away. This affects the nervous system, it affects blood pressure, it affects circulation, and gradually increases risk. Another hidden factor is poor sleep. The brain and cardiovascular system recover during sleep. If sleep is short or disrupted, recovery is incomplete. This creates long-term strain. Some people also have metabolic changes, blood sugar fluctuations, cholesterol imbalance. These do not always cause clear symptoms, but they affect blood vessels. Another important group is people who feel almost fine. They have small symptoms, occasional fatigue, mild dizziness, slight pressure changes, but nothing serious. And this is exactly the group that often ignores early warnings, because nothing feels urgent. But risk does not depend on how you feel. It depends on what is happening inside the body. When symptoms appear, the most important thing is action, not analysis, not waiting, not observation. Action. Time is critical because brain cells depend on oxygen, and when blood flow is disrupted, damage begins quickly. The first step is recognition. Sudden weakness, facial asymmetry, speech difficulty, loss of balance. These are not normal symptoms. Even if they are mild, even if they disappear, they require attention. The next step is immediate response. Do not wait for symptoms to return. Do not try to rest it off. Do not assume it will pass, because delay reduces the chance of recovery. Another important point is simplicity. You do not need to diagnose the problem. You only need to recognize that something is wrong. The faster action is taken, the more options exist, because early intervention can restore blood flow. But this window is limited. Minutes matter, not hours. This is why hesitation is dangerous, because hesitation feels safe, but it costs time. And time is exactly what the brain cannot afford. Even when people know the symptoms, they still ignore them. And this is not because they don't care, it is because the symptoms do not match expectations. People expect something dramatic, something painful, something obvious. But early stroke symptoms are often quiet, subtle, confusing. Another reason is denial. The brain tries to protect itself. It looks for simple explanations. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'll check later. These thoughts reduce anxiety, but they also delay action. Another factor is temporary improvement. If symptoms disappear, people feel safe. They assume the problem is gone. But temporary improvement is not recovery. It is compensation. And compensation does not last. Another important point is habit. People are used to ignoring small symptoms. Headaches, fatigue, dizziness, these are common, so they become normal. And when something more serious appears, it is treated the same way. Ignored. The body sends signals, but the mind filters them. And that filter is often the problem, because it decides what is important and what is not. There is always a moment when everything can still be changed. A moment when the body gives you a signal. Not too late, not too early. Exactly in time. But that moment is easy to miss, because it does not feel urgent. It feels small. A slight weakness. A strange feeling in the face. A few seconds of confusion. Something that passes quickly. And because it passes, it feels safe. But this is the turning point. This is the moment where the outcome is not yet decided, where action can still prevent something serious. Most people miss this moment, not because they don't care, but because it does not look dangerous enough. And that is why it becomes dangerous. Because the body gives you a chance, but it does not repeat that chance forever. The next time, the signal may not disappear. The next time, the body may not compensate. And the difference between these two moments is everything. Your body does not hide problems. It shows them. But not in a way that forces you to act. It shows them quietly, through changes, through small signals, through moments that seem unimportant. And the most important thing to understand is this. Serious conditions do not begin with strong symptoms. They begin with small ones. The ones people ignore. The ones people explain away. The ones that don't interrupt daily life. But these are the real warnings, because they come early, when you still have control, when you can still act, when the outcome is still flexible. The body is always communicating. The question is not whether there are signals. The question is whether you recognize them, because sometimes the difference between ignoring a symptom and understanding it is not just health,